I used to.
Sort of like, kind of like,
Call to order the meeting of the Rutherford Board of Education for October 2nd. Ask folks to please stand and pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Go continue.
Ask the secretary to please call the roll.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Here.
Mr. Healy,
Here.
Mrs. Jones,
Here.
Mrs. Librera,
Here.
Mr. Mazzone,
Here.
Mr. Racine,
Here.
Mr. Rowland,
Here.
Mr. McLean.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interests is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the Rutherford Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place posted on the bulletin board outside of the Borough Clerk's office, mailed to the Herald, South Bergenite, and Record newspapers, and filed with the Borough Clerk. Hard copies of the agenda are available in this meeting room, and the agenda is posted electronically on the district's website at www.rutherfordschools.org. Regular meetings of the Rutherford Board of Education will be broadcast without editing during a 2-hour segment as limited by Comcast time constraints on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. on Comcast Public Access Channel and on Fios Channel 38. A video of this meeting can also be viewed on our website, www.rutherfordschools.org. The video link can be found by opening the Board of Education link and clicking on Public Meetings and then Videos. Any member of the public who wishes to view a DVD of this meeting can make a request in writing to the Board Secretary. In your packets were the minutes from the meeting of September 18th. It was the regular meeting only. It was no executive session. Were there any comments or changes to be made to those minutes? So hearing no changes and if no objections, we'll ask the secretary to enter those into the record, please. Turn the meeting, please, to the superintendent for a report on annual student achievement.
Thank you. Before we get to the student achievement, just a few items to go over, some on the agenda tonight and a few other points of information. This week is the Week of Respect in schools throughout the state of New Jersey. I included in your packet the outline of activities that are going on in all the schools. And the week of October, I've written down here somewhere, 16th, is the Anti-Violence Week, and also included in the packet were the activities planned in the schools. And try to do things that are connected with the curriculum and are age appropriate in terms of the activities. I mentioned, and I want to take the opportunity to mention it publicly at the meeting, that it was a good fortune, and I guess planned this way by the, well, not really, because they do these monthly. The New York Jets, who last year, remember we talked about them working with Pierpont, part of the Play 60, and there'll be a player coming tomorrow to do an assembly with kids at 1:30 as part of, and stomp out bullying, so it ties in, very nicely with the Week of Respect. I also want to remind you that we have our band competition that the borough, the high school band hosts. If you're available to stop by on Saturday, it begins about 4:30. Just keep in mind, though, in terms of truth in advertising, when you host the competition, your own band doesn't participate in the competition. They do an exhibit, and they do it at the end of the night. So if you want to see the band really in a competition, it would not be this one. But it's a nice event. Gets about, I think, 13 schools, if I'm not mistaken, from around the area who send their marching bands. The Distinguished Graduate Award this year is going to go to Mr. Patrick Fletcher. You've all got some information about the October 18th date, and we've also invited Mr. Fletcher to take part in the homecoming activities that are that weekend. Mr. Fletcher is a class of 1978, and he is a superintendent of schools at Riverdale. He was the first research assistant to the superintendent back in the early 80s, and from there he became a BA. From there he moved on to assistant superintendents and superintendency in Glen Rock and now in River Edge. Also, Mr. Fletcher has done a tremendous amount of work outside of and connected to his job with special education and handicapped children, disabled children, and adults. And in fact, was honored, he and his wife, as the State Volunteer of the Year a couple of years ago. So he's done a lot of good work in a lot of areas. He's also served on the state and national Superintendents Association's executive committees. His mom was a nurse for many years at Pierpont, and had a large family of siblings who went through the school. And I'm pleased that, a colleague, but I'm also pleased that we've given out, well, I don't know now, it's probably 25 or maybe more of these awards. And first time we've had an educator, we've had some who've taught in college, but first time we've had an educator on a K-12 level. And as a school that rewards, graduates who want to succeed, it's nice to bring somebody in the world of our level of academics. Mr. Fletcher likes to remind everybody, and he probably will do it. I'm going to ask him not to, but he probably will. When he speaks to students, that he always likes to say how he has gotten up there in age and he's not as young as he used to be. And then he reminds everybody that I was actually teaching here the year he graduated. So there you go. All right. So so Mr. Fletcher, if you're getting this on TV or something, I beat you to it. You can't do it. I got another thing. The Bulldog Academy. We're just about ready to go. Finally, we've gotten deliveries in from IKEA. Everything's put together. We're going to move the students in, barring some last-minute delay, on Wednesday. Yes, this week. We're going to aim for a ribbon cutting, like a ceremonial ribbon cutting, on Friday, October 27th, during the day, so the kids can be a part of it. And when we get the flyer done, I'll send it out to all of you. I realize for some of you couldn't be there, but if any of you can, we'll do it. We want to have the students involved in it. And again, it's been a very good and rewarding conclusion. But we've a couple of bumps on the road, but everyone's worked well to get this together. And as you see, the students are off to a good start, even working out of this room in terms of being out in the community and things like that. The roundtable the other night, just an update. I've been sending to you the handful of emails that we've gotten and comments, and they've all been relatively supportive and positive. And it's up on the web now, the presentation. And I know there's people who are speaking about it, and may not be commenting to us, but we're still speaking about it. There's been good response in terms of continuing the study. So I know in our next meeting we're going to be putting a resolution to continue the study, but based upon like an election, the preliminary returns, it seems to me that we really should continue to look at the projects and the concepts. And in that looking, the few suggestions that we've gotten about adding this or thinking about that, can also be part of that dialogue with the architect, with the engineer, with the board, with the community going forward for the next few months. So I know it's not on the agenda tonight, but I do think in terms of what we've been hearing, the push to try to explore these topics is still there. So let's move on to the Student Achievement Report. And this will be posted on the web tomorrow. So anybody who is here or is at home watching this, when you go and you see it on video, this will be posted on our webpage. Okay? But just to walk the board through, this is a report you've seen before, similar every year. If you follow with me, if you have it, on page 3, we have the list of tests that we give. I want to point out that grade 4 and grade 8 last year had the New Jersey Ask Science. That has now been changed to a new test, which will be given in May. And believe it or not, we still don't know what that test is. Okay? The test is scheduled for May, and the state is asking now for volunteers to get together and figure out what test we should use. And it's going to be moved from grade 4 to grade 5. So the students who were tested last year in science will be tested again this year. Okay? I don't like to make editorial comments, so I don't think I even need to make one on that particular point. Grade 9 to 12, they have the biology competency test at the end of their biology year. For most of our students, is grade 9. For some students, it could be another grade. Some schools could be a different grade. Our kids take a grade 9. And then, of course, Park is in grades 3 through 11. When Park first started off, there were probably 20 some odd states. Now it's down to about 9 in the nation that are giving the test. And again, that's just factual information. If you go to the next page, there's only about 9 in the nation that are still using Park.
That are still using Park.
If you go to page 4, you'll see that with Park, we'll talk about Park first, level 1, 2, and 3 are either not meeting grade level, partially meeting, or approaching grade level. And grade 4 and 5 is meeting or exceeding. New Jersey has chosen to have students who fall in 4 and 5 be considered passing, for lack of a better word. Right? Some states who have used Park have used levels 3, 4. We've had this conversation before. I realize there's redundancy. If you looked at the scores that we've had in some grade levels now, and I'll talk about why some grade levels don't measure up in a moment, you'd see that the 3, 4, and 5 is very consistent with what New Jersey Ask and HESPA used to be. So, I think in terms of level of achievement, debatable whether 3 should be considered meeting a minimum standard or not, but that's a decision the state made. I summarized for you on page 5, so we didn't have to necessarily go through every graph, right? The state, the district, and in every case but Lincoln and Washington, grade 3, the district is the school for language arts, right? So Pierpont is the kids in 4, 5, 6, Union 7 and 8, and the high school 9, 10, 11. You would see that in every grade level in language arts, with the exception of grade 11, which I'll speak to in a moment, we are above the state and pretty consistent with where we were previous years. One of the reasons why I don't give you a comparison chart to the scores from last year is the selling point of Park was going to be student growth. So if last year's 4th graders scored higher or lower than this year's 4th graders, that really wasn't what Park was supposed to be about. It was going to be to take those 4th graders, right, and see how they did in 5th grade. You have to dig real deep into the data to get that. Okay, they sold it on student growth, but still, when you read the newspaper articles, when you read the press releases, when you hear people talk about it, well, grade 3 did better last year, better this year, and that wasn't what it was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be monitoring student growth. And again, I'm just trying to present what I see as the facts about the testing system that the state embarked on a couple of years ago. Grade 11, you look at the state, 37%, 34%. Okay? We'll talk a little bit about this when we get to math as well. You'll see grade 10, 50%. That's because students could pass their graduation requirement in grade 9. So the number of students who are taking the test in grade 11 either are students who have failed the test in grade 9 and 10, or are students who are saying, my mother's making me take the test, but I'm not really going to give this 3 hours of my life too much attention. To me, I still am trying to wrap my head around how you can have a graduation requirement, which you'll see when we get to math. a large number of our students make their high school graduation requirement in grade 8, because that's when they're taking Algebra 1. Okay? So you will see if you look later at the graph, we only had about 70 students take the test, grade 11 for language arts, and we have about 190 in the class, because those are those opt-outs we hear about. So, I think the assessments are important, but the system is designed in a way that I, quite frankly, and I'm being honest, has really limited the importance a little bit in terms of as a judgment on how well we're doing. I think I've said this before. When you get the data on the standards, and I want to talk about this in a moment, and you really analyze it, and you do some data mining, and you look, you can find out a lot of wonderfully good and sometimes not so wonderfully negative things about where your curriculum and how it's being delivered. But in terms of that fingerprint of, wow, our 10th graders are doing great, you don't really get that. Okay? Now, just to show you what I'm talking about, not to belabor it, this 10-page report was done by Mr. Ursulisi about the high school results. And he and the teachers in the English department took a look at every standard and looked at how many students answered the question. So in some cases, when only a handful of kids answered the question, they said, we really don't get data that's very useful to us here, because only a handful of kids answered. But when there was an area like, for example, 58 students were assessed, and we did poorly in that area, they're looking at how we can use IXL, which is kind of a remedial sort of program, and how that would be put into, in bold, into the curriculum this year, into lesson plans, so that we could address what looks like a skill lacking. So see, and a similar thing is going on with math, and a similar type of analysis is going on in the lower grades with the supervisors and the teachers. So where I sound a little critical of the aggregate approach to PAR, because I think there's a lot to be critical about, some of the data that we get when we look at individual standards and how we did and how we utilize that, I think is beneficial. Probably more beneficial than the information we got from HESMA. So, I'm just trying to be fair to the students and fair to the teachers and fair to the supervisors to say, the 75% is great because we're above the 34%. Oh boy, that's bad. But with 70 students who have taken it, and 30 of the students of the 70 are kids who have struggled in language arts year after year, those numbers are not very reflective. But this sort of thing is very positive. Positive in the sense of what we get out of it. I would be hopeful that as maybe we move forward with new administrations in Trenton and, some different perhaps insights, that we could somehow find a better graduation requirement, a more meaningful one, keep some of the value of this assessment tool for the curriculum, but give a little more weight back to the meaning of the test. Okay? But moving on, if you look then, and again, I can go through any of this if you'd like, but that summary that I gave you, those are the individual graphs for every grade level. And it shows areas where at each school, so cross-state refers to how many students in the nation. Now, there's 421,000 students taking part. That's not a lot when you look at 98,000 coming out of New Jersey. I'll remind you that the way the numbers are distributed do not match up with the color above. See what I'm saying? Like when you see the 4%, they have it divided into equal 5 parts, but the color, so that throws people off a little bit too. So just to walk you through the first one, if you looked at this, it's 4% in grade 3. We're at the highest level, right? Exceeded expectations in nationwide. 7% in New Jersey, 9% here in the district. 10% at Lincoln, 7% at Washington. Okay? So that's how you read that graph. But the aggregate numbers are what I gave you on the chart before. Okay? Right.
I was looking at the heat maps they have,
Mhm.
the red blue green.
Yeah. Well, I'll look at, for example, at Lincoln School where 61% in literary, right, reading, met or exceeded, and 54% in Washington. That one's closer. Then there's a 52 at Washington, there's a 42. But some areas like informational text, right, Lincoln did significantly better. Okay. That's what I was referring to before, when the teachers and the supervisors will then take all the questions that make up that section and take a look at, and every question there's a graph that comes out showing you the question, showing the results, showing what standard in the state standards, which are our curriculum standards, right, are being measured. And then we go and we do some process about why. What maybe do we need to stress more? What area maybe were we lacking a little bit? Take a look at the student makeup too. What was your student population that year? Because again, I go back to what I'm saying about growth. Okay? So if there were some students in a small number of students now, remember the total number of students at 97 and 85. So one or two students make three students make a difference, pretty good difference, right? So did somebody have more ELL kids? Did somebody have, the resource room students might be in one school and not another school. There's a lot of variables. But that's the beauty of, if there is a beauty to the park, is that you can get that kind of detail. And this is just the tip of the iceberg detail, that every one of those sections, every question is broken down by how students did in this. And the faculty will spend time in their PLC meetings, in their faculty meetings, some levels even on the workshop day coming up and I've done some of this already going into the summer with the supervisors, do that kind of breakdown to get the answer to the question.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? So I think it's the Linkit assessments that also offer some benchmarked
yes.
Data as to how the kids are doing in the different grades in the different schools. Have you been able to correlate the results that you get from Linkit to the park scores, and do they match?
Yeah, extremely accurate and close, both as a predictor and also as a way to dig into finding some tools to remediate, build upon, enhance. So yeah, they do match.
So reinforces the strength of each as an assessment.
And also can track how students are progressing throughout the year, because remember, who really needs to be looking at, I realize we want to look at the curriculum we're delivering, right? But if the third grade kids struggled a little bit in one area last year, well, they're fourth grade kids. So as those scores move with the students to Pierpont, the Linkit assessment, for example, can help the teachers see, well, what's transpired since last March to this September, October. And they could do some cross-referencing to see, where the student's at right now. But to answer your question more generally, yes, there's been there's been a lot of satisfaction, especially the lower grade levels. The high school level really did not stay with Lincoln. They felt that it did not serve the needs that they had. It was more of a it was giving information, but wasn't giving as much intervention, and that's why they switched the IXL, because the stakes are a little higher for the kids who need it in the high school level to get to that graduation requirement and improve the skills. So you can go through all of the slides if you like. For the sake of time, we could skip to page 15. But the interesting thing is page 14, which shows you the 70 students who took the test in Rutherford. Okay. And if you go back to the 421 students who took the elementary test nationwide, you see there's only 109 nationwide. So this is not just a Rutherford problem. This is a problem that you got to sit for a couple of days of an exam that really doesn't mean any, unless if you're a very, you could be very altruistic. And I love, our students, and I've been my whole career working with students, but I will say, often 17 and altruism doesn't always go hand in hand. I'm going to sit in March for 3 hours or 4 hours to take a test. That's giving me nothing. I've already passed it. It's funny that for the years of HESPA, right? And before HESPA was HSPT, and before that it was the minimum basic skills, no one ever opted out the graduation test. In fact, they came crawling in when they were sick to take the test. So I'm hoping that there's a little more clarity and sanity when we look forward in the graduation requirements. And then we get better measurement of how we're doing. Okay, in math, let's take a look there. Grade 4 is really a bit of a head scratcher. We're looking at that with the supervisor right now and with the teachers, trying to figure out what happened there. The school principal and assistant principal, we're also looking at last year's class and the makeup of the class and the instruction going on. Because you'll see it's the only place, until we get to the 11th graders where the kids are opted out, and 8th grade, which I'll talk about in a moment, but there's a reason for 8th grade, where we fell below the state. I don't have an answer for you as to why. I'm just telling you that they're looking at it. And there are some suggested reasons that they've come up with, which, doesn't do much at this moment this year. Okay? But everywhere else, we were considerably above the state, and until you get to grade 8. Don't be fooled by grade 8, because take a look at grade 9. Grade 9, Algebra 1, you'll see we were a little bit above, right, the state. 13% of the kids in the high school were above. 59% at Union, because the majority of our good math students and our academically rigorous type of students are taking Algebra 1 at Union School. So those students, those 59%, congratulations, here's your middle school diploma. You also have met your graduation requirement for high school in grade 8. The students who take Algebra 1 in the high school are students who either failed it in 8th grade or didn't get a C higher than a C, struggled, right? Or students who were in a different kind of tracked program. They are not the strong math students. And there's a very small number. Most of our 9th graders are taking geometry. Conversely, back in grade 8, the lower state average and the lower Rutherford average would be students who are struggling in math. Students who are in our MD class. Students who are in our resource rooms who, struggle historically with math. So that's the reasoning there. If you take the 59% at Union and you plug that in to grade 8, obviously the state number would be higher too, but it would probably be consistent with the rest. Okay? Geometry, and same pattern you can see with math, better with the Algebra 2 kids, okay, than the language arts in grade 11. I don't have an answer to that, other than they're 10th graders, not 11th graders for the most part. And that 17-year-old thing I talked about hasn't kicked in yet. Okay, so they're maybe sitting more for the test. Okay. And similar kind of data mining is going on with the curriculum on that. Okay. And the charts that follow. So before we move off of that, any questions about that? Okay. Despite some of the problems with that most superintendents, most principals, most teachers, a lot of people see with how the aggregate scores of these tests in the new CUSAC that will be coming out in 2018, which I'll talk about again when we get to CUSAC in a moment. But it's, if you hit a certain level of state success, in the eyes of how the state's measuring you, then you're not monitored, you get a waiver. If you fall short somewhere, the team comes in to monitor you, right? They've actually increasing the value of the state assessments in terms of the weight in CUSAC. So where some of the scores have declined a bit, right? Statewide, I'm not just talking about here. They're increasing the value. And they've also put in to these scores that they allow you 5% opting out. So if you have 100 students, right, and 95 take the test, and 95 get a 4 or 5, you show 95%. It actually give you 100% because they're giving you 5 freebies. But if you have only 50 kids take the test and 50 get 4 or 5, they're only giving you credit for 50%. The opt-outs count as failures. We'll talk more about the new CUSAC next year when it comes down. But there's a lot of concerns that a lot of people have about some of the changes and how it may impact how schools are viewed by the public. And it's not just, I mean, I'm talking about the Ridgewoods, and a lot of schools are very concerned about how this may impact. We'll talk more about that down the road. Doesn't impact anything yet. Now, page 25. The New Jersey Assessment of Skills and Knowledge Test, New Jersey Ask. This is the last year, as I said, for the science test, right? Grades 4 and 8. It's going to be a new test next year, and it's going to be something. We don't know what. It'll be grade 5 and grade 8. Grade 4, the district results for students are comparable to those of the district factor group and also those at the state level. District factor groups are going to be going away too, we keep saying. They're still part of New Jersey Ask. You don't find them too many other places. Like you can't find them for Park. In grade 8, the district results for total students are comparable to those in the district factor group and surpass those at the state level. So if you look at the chart, you'll see that we had 89.8% of our grade 4 students at or above proficiency. The district factor group was 92, slightly higher. Statewide was 85, slightly lower. Our general ed population, extracting the special ed subgroup, we had 95.5% at or above, which is pretty much equal to the district factor group, 0.1% lower, and above the state at 90.2. Our special ed was at 66%, a little bit below the district factor, well, below the district factor group and below the state. Again, we keep looking at our special ed programs. Why we don't expect the scores necessarily to be comparable to the general ed. They've always fallen a little bit below the state and the district factor group. We really don't seem to come up with a good answer. We think our curriculum is being delivered. We have the co-teaching. We have the aides in the classroom. We are keeping kids in the district a little bit more, but other districts are doing that too. But we keep looking at that. Again, not abysmal, but you like to be at or above the average. Then it breaks down by white, Asian, and Hispanic. And in all those areas, we're right in the neighborhood, a little bit higher, statistically even, a little bit below. Okay? Grade 8, very similar results. The overall district, statistically even with the DFG, 82.3 to 83, and above the state at 73. Our general ed at 89 and 89.8, again, statistically the same with DFG, above the state. Special ed, once again, is lower for everybody on grade 8. Ours pretty much at 31% compared to 48 and 40. It's pretty much the same discrepancy that you saw with different numbers up above. And then you have the white, the Asian, and Hispanic. Okay. Anything on that? New Jersey Biology Competency Test, again, has been a bit of a tough test to sell since 2010. It's gotten tougher now that the ninth graders have to sit for Park, and then very shortly thereafter have to sit for this test, which is not part of their grade, is not part of their course requirement. It's not connected with them passing or failing biology. It's not a graduation requirement, and it's given usually around Memorial Day weekend. So it's a tough test to sell. You'll see, as I told you every year, and you've heard predating me about this, 56% of our kids are at or above. That's lower than the district factor group. It's about where the state is. Our general ed, same, 65%, lower. None of the scores are very good. I mean, the district factor groups where where we were at 89% in grade 8 and the district factor group was at 90%, you're looking at 56 and 69. Okay? And again, I think, kids are smart. You can tell them, this is important, this has meaning, this has that, but I think statewide they just don't put a lot of oomph into it. Our biology teachers have tried their best to make some connection, to the course, but we don't get the results until late summer, early fall, so it can't even be any kind of connection to the course. The problem with this test and New Jersey Ask is that these are just numbers. You don't get the detailed information. You get a little more with New Jersey Ask, not much with biology. You don't get a lot of detailed information like you do with Park. Okay, we added this year Access for Ls to the presentation. Access for Ls is the assessment that's given for English language learners. Our students, sometimes also called, ESL, but now it's ELL. And the English language learner, there's we did not put the actual results in because we have such a small number of kids at every grade level that we don't want to give total results because it's too identifiable. We have 4 kids on grade 4, and we give you it's too identifiable. But we have 51 students last year who took the test, and 35% of our students fell in the expanding, bridging, or reaching ranges. What that means, if you look up in the first paragraph, you have entering describes students who basically have just came to the country, virtually no English. Number 2 is emerging, starting to get some general use. The areas you want to be in are the developing, and the expanding and the bridging, because those are the moving into the mainstream in terms of English language use. The 35% is a healthy figure because a lot of the kids are only in the program for 1 year or 2 years, so the majority of your students are brand new. So you don't expect them to be in that category 3, 4, 5 initially. Okay, the next page, 32, the SAT reasoning test changed once again last year. If you recall, in 2005, the test added a third component, and it had critical reading for language arts, right? It had critical reading, it had writing, and then it had math. And the scores that we were familiar with, probably when we were in school, of 1,600 became 2,400. Okay? Last year, it changed back to the 1,600 and took the writing component and the reading and now call it evidence-based reading and writing. The SAT, and Mrs. Jones had talked about this in curriculum instruction, has moved a little bit towards the type of testing that Park is, with more research-based writing responses and so on. Okay? And there have been some states who have said that they would like to use the SAT, and I think Connecticut is using it, if I'm not mistaken, as their graduation requirement, and paying for the students to take the test and using that. Okay. New Jersey has entertained that, to my knowledge, but that's so. The scores this year, 540. So we're back to the 1,600. So 554 on the language arts, 547 on the math. We are once again above, as we've been most years, above the state, which is 539 and 537, 1075, and above the national, which is 538 and 533, which is 1070. If you remember, in June, I had Dr. Hopkins and Mr. Salisi and Ms. Schmedding here to report that although we're happy and that we're above averages and we're happy with the schools our kids go up to, we would like to see the scores higher. And they presented to the board back in June some things that were going to be infused into the curriculum. So we'll see next year, in the first year of those subtle changes, if we see any spike. But the numbers, hard to compare to last year. I mean, last year we had 520 for reading and 509 for writing. So you look at 554 and you say, well, that's better than 520, right, and 509, but it's a different test. So, math last year was 540, and this year is 547. And if you go back in time, I mean, I didn't include the comparison chart because it's a different test, but math has been going backwards, 540, 529, 544, 537, 518. And the writing's always been in around that 520, 515. And that's another thing. We've been kind of flat. So, we're hoping to improve it. And as Dr. Hopkins and Mr. Oslisi and Mr. Menning told you, there's also the monetary and economic idea that some of our families don't necessarily have the income to go to the really pricey tutoring places or see the benefit of that because their scores are just now a reflective piece, not the whole reason you get in or don't get into a school. Okay.
Do you ever take a look at the median scores for the SATs?
We don't get that report from the college boards, but we could. So we would have limited access to the other schools. But we do. I know Dr. Hopkins does do a more detailed analysis. And the other thing to keep in mind with averages is we have a large number of our students who take the test. Some years over 90%. So some years less. So, you get a couple of very low scores and the average. Which is why Dr. Hopkins does it more detailed. But the thing that I report to you, and I'm required to report to you, is what gets reported, gets released by, whether it's the State Department, they release the PARCC scores, the College Board releases the other scores. Okay? But I could also ask her if I can get that information in the next month or two. If she has that, I'll get it.
Yeah, especially if we're going to be looking later at the scores before and after
Right.
the programs they put
Right.
in place. I think the median along with the mean would be a good thing to look at.
Right. And I would also, on that topic, I would suggest, that I'm sure, not to put, this, let's win the big game, Dr. Hopkins, get the scores up type of thing. The 10th and 11th graders are taking the test. We're putting some changes in our program back to 8, 9, 10. I don't know if you're going to see immediate impact. I think, the students who are taking the test, some of them will be taking the test this month, and their scores will be factored in here. So, we might want to give it a year or two to really see, but I'll see what I can get for you. The ACT, which is the American College Testing, 54 of our students took that number up. The number has arisen since 2013. As I mentioned before, the ACT has been around for a long, long time and was often the college entrance that was used in other parts of the country outside of this area. And often students here did not take it. More and more students are taking it now because they think it's a better reflection of what they are, and I think they're right in some ways of what goes on in the curriculum. You notice it's broken into English, math, reading, science, composition, and it's with a whole different score set. We're above in almost every area on the state and national level. A couple were hanging right around the neighborhood, but I think this year, if I'm not mistaken, we're a little behind in reading, but we're above everywhere else. More students are taking it. It often was a test that some students took who thought they would really struggle on the SAT. And sometimes that kept the scores down a little bit, but now more students are taking it. This year, for the first year, as you know, the high school started providing all students the opportunity to take the PSAT. Instead of just making it optional, all students take it. It's given during the school day. And that is, I think, yes. But this year, they're also going to offer the ACT to students who want to take that. So, or both. So that students will have a chance to take the practice test. The practice ACT, which the acronym escapes me right now. The AP results. Once again, we're very pleased with our results. I apologize for the small print. But if you take a look at the bar graph, keep in mind that 3, 4, or 5 is usually what you aim for, right, on the AP. And you'll see since 2013 how the percentage of students who score 3, 4, or 5 has increased in Rutherford High School. We're at the blue graph. So we went from 70 to a high of 92. This past year was 82%. When you look at the chart, you will see that in Rutherford High School last year, when we were at 82% of our students who take the test getting 3, 4, and 5, the state average was at 70%, 71, and the global, and it is global because it takes this test around the world, was at 60.3. You'll also notice, and we've had this conversation before, how as our numbers of students scoring high on the test has gone up percentage-wise, the number of students in the program have gone from 42 to 144 this past year, and the number of tests from 130 to 258. So it's a remarkable achievement. When I mentioned the SAT score, sometimes the average gets lowered by having more students take the test, to almost double the number of students taking the courses, just about double the number of tests they're taking, and continuing to score well above the measurement in other areas. And as you know, the high school was cited in 2015 and 2016 as a meritorious school by the College Board. Maybe getting it again this year. That comes out usually around this time of year. And this year, I believe we're going to have over 300 tests being taken, as we've added more and more AP programs.
Just to clarify the statistic, so there's the number of students and then the number of exams, recognizing that a single student could take more than one exam.
Right.
But then the 3+ students are, assuming they scored a 3 or more in one of the tests that they took, at least
Right.
one of the tests they took.
Right. Otherwise, percentage is right. At least one of the tests, right?
Got it.
And once again, every teacher and every supervisor gets a detailed analysis of every test and how students fared and things like that. Okay. The profile, the last thing to report, we had 168 graduates last year. The graduation cohort has always been, for the last 4 or 5 years, has always been lower than we believe it to be, is always 90, 91, 92. And the reason for that percent, if I told you how many students graduated of the 168 students last year, I think we started the year with 169 or 70 students. So our graduation seniors was like 99%. The state, and there is a consistent theme here. I don't want to sound like I'm out with a picket sign on the street, but the consistent theme has been that statistically comes up with ways to maybe not look like you have 99% of the kids. The cohort is now, the kids who enter in the 9th grade 4 years earlier, how many of those students have graduated? Now, if they leave the district, we have to get reported back to us. If they don't graduate somewhere else, then they didn't meet their, if kids leave because they want a GED their sophomore year, if a special ed student is going to stay for a 5th year because that's his program, all those things are go against you in the cohort. So if we can't track the kid when he leaves for some reason, we have to count him as somebody who didn't make it, even though maybe he did make it somewhere else. So it's what it is. I mean, it was usually between 90 and 92%, but in terms of the kids who are sitting in a senior class on September or whatever that year, is usually about 97 or 98%. 69% of our kids went to 4-year colleges, 24% to 2-year colleges last year, which brings about 93% attending college, another 1% attending a school that is not a college, some kind of perhaps technical or vocational school. So that's 94% of our graduates last year went on to some kind of higher education, further education. 2% went into the military, and 4% report that they were unemployed. And that's the report. Any questions? And again, for anybody in the public who wants to see this, it'll be up on the web tomorrow. Also, there's various resources you can go, and the Department of Education has the park scores, and the New Jersey Ask. There's a lot of different places. Okay. The last thing I want to say, and what turned out to be a much lengthier presentation tonight for me, I did include the packet of which I'll do quarterly now. I think it's quarterly. Or is it 3 times a year? So we get the buildings inspection by Advocate. I'm sure it was quarterly or 3 times a year. Keep in mind that it always starts out well at the beginning of the year, right? When buildings are good, but don't look too much at what went on in the past, because remember we changed our night custodial service, to Aramark. So those numbers that came before were other companies, right? So good or bad or in between. So really going forward, we'd like to see how Aramark does. Our custodians are included in there too. I mean, they inspect the entire building. So they don't inspect just the sections that my custodians do. I did want to share with you all that, the thoroughness of the report and the detail and the goal setting. And then what we do is Mr. Kelly, Mr. Paterno, and I meet with one or two of the folks from Evocate that does this, that do the inspections, and we meet usually with the manager on site for Aramark or whoever the company was, and their office manager, and we review every page of the report, and then we set goals that, going forward, those goals you see are set based on the positives or the negatives in the report. And Evocate services are paid for, right, Mr. Kelly, out of the from the company Aramark, in terms of it's not anything that comes out of boards. Okay.
One of the points was that they were low on the number of black slaves.
Right.
So are
We addressed that, yes, and we've given them. I believe what they're going to do, Aramark, is going to run training themselves and have everybody up to speed. But those are the sort of things that our Evocate does a great job of making sure they're in compliance with all the terms of the contract, all the terms of what's needed to function, things that, quite frankly, could slip by without someone who's dedicated to that task.
I remember 2 or 3 superintendents who were superintendent.
Yes, I remember that too. Yeah, but I don't know. Could be another thing to add to the resume. And when you speak to me at the next dinner, you can throw that in there too. Okay. So any other comments? I'm sorry I went on for a while, but if you have any questions or down the line, feel free to let me know about the student achievement.
Thank you. So moving into the time that's the report of the president, and considering my September, about the only thing I can report on is the food at all the major airlines, as I spend most of the time traveling. So I appreciate, though, that members of the board were out and attending the various functions. I was gone 80% of the time in September, so I don't know if anyone has any comments that they would like to offer to the group, regarding any of the events that you attended that I was not at.
Well,
Yes.
I went to every back-to-school night. I do it because I like them, but I do it also to represent the REF. But every one of them were well attended, and every one of them went very, very well. It was, lots of very good reports this year at Pierpont. It was much easier, and the parents are smooth, as Mr. Rowland just said. So that was a big change. The 8th grade one was 7th and 8th grade at the Union Middle School went well too. So that was really good.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, I would echo Diane's remarks. I know at Pierpont, I thought it was great. The video that was produced as well. I don't know if Mr. Met was responsible for that, but I thought that was great with REF represented, as well as Officer Anderson. I think it was a nice way to do it, breaking it into 2 sessions. I know I had a lot of comments from parents who said that it was a lot smoother. I did use your word from last year's experience, so kudos to Pierpont. They did a great job.
And I'll share that with the administration.
Any other comments?
I was remiss. I left. Oh, go. Sorry. No, go.
Oh, I was just going to say, same exact comment in terms of the Pierpont back to school night. It was a very positive experience this year, and I definitely got the sense that they had incorporated a lot of sort of feedback and thought based on what happened last year. So I thought that was very good. The other comment that I wanted to make was about the roundtable, which I thought Mr. Hurley did a very good job of presenting the concepts that we have been discussing for feedback, and I thought that the folks that were there at the meeting were very sort of eager to learn more and receptive and complimentary of the effort that had gone into putting those proposals together, or those concepts together. I would also say that just in the days following, I heard a a fair amount of feedback, just sort of casual anecdotal feedback from folks that they were excited to hear that that the discussion was ongoing, not necessarily that they approved of a full set of ideas or didn't approve of a full set of ideas, but that they welcomed the discussion and that they thought it was a good thing that we were having it as a community. So.
And that is the feedback I alluded to before. And also, I was appreciative of the fact that those of you that came, and some came out, the afternoon session, and Eddie got the matinee. He was at the and I heard from 2 board members who couldn't make it immediately the next day for feedback. So I appreciate that. But I like the fact that the people that have reached out to me have also all offered to be part of the process. How can I help? What can I do if we go forward? And that's a positive because I will at the appropriate time. I've been working on in my head and with the folks that I've used to bounce off. Poor Joe has here things from my head all the time. But what type of committees and what type of process, whichever way we go, we would take. So we will be reaching out to people for that, and I think that would be. So I appreciate that. I was remiss in making a comment. I just got this hot off the presses at 6:17 tonight that the Washington School and Lincoln School are getting honored with I don't want to say silver level certification through the Safe Routes to School, part of the Green Team. They are Mr. Racine, and this is through the Green Team, and this is through the mayor's walk to school. So this is our students and our faculty and the board and have cooperated with that. But this is kudos to the mayor and to the council and to the Green Team. So Mr. Racine is the champion for Lincoln School.
Champion.
I think he won a TKO in the 5th round. And Ms. Karen Travelin, who's a teacher here at the high school, is named the champion for Washington School. And if Ms. Travelin and Mr. Racine and anybody else who received this email cares to attend, there's a luncheon on October the 19th, I believe it is, that's going to honor the schools. And again, I mean, the schools are a beneficiary of the recognition, but I thank the Green Team and the mayor and the council for their. Did I take away while you were here?
That's okay.
Well, we could just rewind. We'll edit the tape out, okay? And Julie is a member of the. Well, you could speak to that.
Yes, thank you very much for your support and the continuing participation in the Safe Routes to School program. I actually nominated both Lincoln and Washington schools individually because they hadn't done enough activities, including the rodeos, to qualify them for the silver level of the certification. It's jumped 2 steps from the previous year, and I also nominated the district as a whole, which will also be jumping from first steps past the bronze level straight to the silver level. So thank you very much for your continued support.
Thank you.
Thank you for nominating us. And my last comment is, it seems like every meeting, it's almost like a Seinfeld episode, we keep referring to Mr. Met. Like you have to think, one of these days we're going to have to get him to come up front and center so that people can see who this gentleman. I keep saying, Mr. Met, what's it? He's a real person. He's back there behind the camera. Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Toward the end of the meeting, we'll get some updates on the self-evaluations reminder that I know will come. So the thing I missed. Yeah?
Diane has something.
We're talking about good things. I would like to make a presentation to 2 of our board members. New Jersey School Boards gives pins for service after 10 years and after 15 and so forth, 20 and so forth. I've been asked to award you, Mr. McQueen, a 10-year pin. I have Slippy and Shelley gets a 15 on only her 15 years, or 15 consecutive years on your Rutherford Cup. So thank you very much for 10 years serving on our school board. And Shelley, sit. And here is your pin. And we're proud of you.
Thank you. That was unexpected. Very nice. Thank you.
Well, I was waiting for the 2 of you to be together.
Very good.
Meeting is got splits.
It's I've got 1 year of experience, 10 times over. And but every year I learn, every meeting, in fact, I learn new things and appreciate the chance to work with the district. And speaking of board membership, so I was one of the points I missed last meeting was the regrettable resignation of Keith, and I know that it surprised people, but we have to take care of our families first and ourselves first. So filling the vacancy, the vacancy was published. We've received 2 people have expressed interest in it, and we'll close that on the 12th, which would be a week from Thursday coming up. So, and then we'll schedule interviews with the parties that have put their name in for that, following the same procedure we have in the past. Thank you for that. I'm going to end comments from the president at that point, and at 8:31, we will open the meeting to the public for any comments that anyone might wish to make. Yes? And
Hi.
so for the official comments, name, address, and comment.
Julia Siegel, address 32 Grand Avenue. First of all, I wanted to thank the superintendent for the presentation last week on all the work that you and the board have been doing as far as putting together conceptual plans for a road forward. I would like to ask that you maybe consider putting up the presentation, not just the video, of the slides that had the little bit more of the detail. I know I was looking forward to reviewing that information so that I could make really specific feedback on some of those concepts. And I would also urge you to I think that the board member mentioned that, a lot of the feedback has been that it's a dialogue until it's, voted on, or at least, there's still this time to kind of flesh out what's going to happen. And I would just urge that you get as much transparency to that as possible. I noticed that the superintendent's meeting wasn't actually on the calendar for the borough, things like that. I think that the more voices you hear during this period, it's a lot less expensive to change design during conceptual design than it is once you start to get into schematic and design development. So the more voices that you can collect in the process now, I think would be better. So whatever you can do to increase that volume of letting people know that this dialogue is happening now, and that there's only one more meeting before the time that you guys are planning on voting, I think that would be beneficial.
Thank you. Do we, just as a reminder, maybe speaking about when we vote, the first vote is not actually...
Right, just a reminder, and again, the vote would be to do what you're suggesting we do. More study, more dialogue. It's not a vote to put any project on a ballot yet, right? So, if the board decides to authorize further study of everything that we spoke about at the meeting, there will be opportunities for every board meeting. There'll probably be another public meeting at some point. I'm not sure exactly when that point would be. We've talked about, Mr. Kelly and I have talked about a few ways that other districts have conducted informational meetings that really seem like very good ideas. And I think once we get to the point that we're moving forward, I don't want to be premature to say let's plan, November 8th to do the following, hypothetically. But if the board decides through a resolution to continue the study, we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that we could have a little more dialogue to and less lecture approach. So we have a couple, I think, viable alternatives to do that. Okay.
Thank you.
And I will put the PowerPoint up just as a comment. I said I was going to do it, and then in the last minute I thought, without the explanation, I wonder if a person who wasn't there, has heard nothing about it, would understand, or know, like, why are you debating one story versus 2 stories at Lincoln, that kind of thing. But to your point, you can focus a little more on the details with the PowerPoint. So I think what I'll do now, being it's been up for about 4 or 5 days, whatever it's been, is maybe get that PowerPoint up in a day or two with a little introduction to say it'd be advisable to refer to the video, but have the PowerPoint.
You know, it might also make sense to just put a few slides at the introduction of the deck that summarize the types of comments you made. That this isn't a proposal at this point. This is a series of concepts that are being explored in response to feedback presented for discussion and
or
feedback.
Even my introductory comments, just say that, because I like to put things up with a paragraph with a link there so people know what they're looking. Otherwise, it gets lost too in the shuffle. I mean, you can go back in the archives and you could find things that if there's a lead in, you can see what it is. So you know, by the next few days, that will be up there. Okay.
Thank you. So we'll close the meeting to the public at 8:36 and move into new business. I would ask Mrs. Ahmed, please, to before moving tonight's personnel motions, maybe explain to us what's on the agenda and take us through any comments and questions on that, please.
One was salary level change, two high school co-curricular, and the reason why I had to stop at that because it's for percussion instructors. And I'm a little, I have to call attention to this because I was a percussion drum right behind. Went to Europe with them, so when you see a band, if the percussion rank isn't good, you don't have a very good one. And I can't tell you this year, I was so impressed with the one grade I saw them in. I said, whose band is this? The first time, really, I was really impressed that they've come a long way, Even their guidance and their rank is getting better.
Yeah.
So I'm glad, I was so happy that, I hope this is the same here.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I'm glad that he's aboard. Okay, that was number 2, 3, length of service payment collective bargaining agreement for adult approved clerical assistant and salary. 5, Title I instructor for Pierpont School. 6, Donna Stevens-Waller, and I have to stop there because I've known Donna since kindergarten. My older son, and there isn't a nicer person to ever work with, trustworthy, so great with everyone. She knows how to handle every kind of situation, and I'm so glad she helped out. Great. 7, lunch monitor. 8, David, and I haven't had a full name,
Sure.
Leave replacement for physics teacher and the salary. 9, substitute teachers, 8, and we went over that, and Captain Pauling, I was wondering why he was talking about Mr. Hurley explained it to me. 10, sidebar agreements, addressing 3 new positions, student service supervisor of elementary ed, and supervisor of planning, research, and testing. 11, Jason Vanillo. 12, travel reimbursements, and that's it.
Very good.
I'd like to echo Shelley's remarks on Donna. She's a wonderful individual, and I wish her well in her new position. I'm sure she will be great. And I just call your attention to the travel reimbursements. I believe the last 2 dates, Amanda Onofrio and Ruth Sutter, 125.18 and 124.18 rather than 17.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, and then, Mrs. Ahmed, I've noted that you do march to a different drummer, but I didn't realize you were a drummer. So,
We had an audition.
So-
Out of 75 kids, I came in 3rd.
Wow. Well, then, if you would please move your resolutions for this evening, as there's no other discussion.
Can I just add a couple of things, just as a point of clarification for everyone? The Title I money, remember, comes out of the federal grant that we get. That's part of grant money. Just so enlighten everyone to what Ms. Ben and I talked about, when we bring in a leave replacement in the middle of the year, we like to get the person approved as a substitute so that he or she can come in a couple of days ahead of the teacher leaving, so can meet with the teacher, shadow the class, and we can have two people getting paid in the same position. So that's the normal procedure. I think this time it stood out a little more because it was only one name and two names in both places. And the sidebar is those positions were added a year or 2 years ago, and we just neglected to put them into the contract, and now that that contract's going to be up for renegotiation, we'll make everything neat with that. So
Okay, so I'd like to move all resolutions 1 through 12 on personnel.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any last questions or comments regarding these resolutions? None? Ask the secretary to please pull the board.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
Mrs. Cabrera,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone,
Yes.
Mr. Racine,
yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. McLean.
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move into curriculum and instruction, and Mrs. Jones, would you introduce for us what will be?
Thank you. There are 4 resolutions for board consideration for approval tonight. Approval number of home instruction number 1 for 1 student. Number 2, NJ QSAC, attesting the accuracy of the QSAC Statement of Assurance 2017 and 2018 school year. 3, approval of district placements for 2 students for the 2017 and 18 school year, which totals over $116,000. And the last one is approval for an overnight for board and choir music and festival to Washington, D.C. I'm sorry, for the band and choir music festival to Washington, D.C. from May 3rd to 5th. Jonathan Kinney and Patricia Blanchard are our sponsors. Do you want to talk any more on the assurance?
Yeah, the
Insurance?
right. The QSAC is the annual self-assessment for more or less. This is a statement of assurance that we're saying that we can document that our the curriculum's in line, governance, procedures, the facility checklist, and every year we have to say to the State Department through the county office that we have met those standards, and should they ever want to come in and see that we can prove it, we have to prove it. On years that you're in the cycle, which we're not right now, for possible monitoring, you still do it. Years that you not, you do it. 2018, there'll be a new QSAC. There'll be some new regulations. We're not even sure if the statement of assurance will remain or stay the same. But this is an annual self-assessment and saying that everything's in line. Okay.
I move resolutions 1 through 4 for curriculum and instruction.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Any last questions or comments on these resolutions? Hearing none, ask the secretary to please pull the board.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
Mrs. Cabrera,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone,
Yes.
Mr. Racine,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. McLean.
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. We move then into finance, and I would ask Mrs. Cabrera to please explain to us what we're looking at this evening.
There's 5 finance motions for approval tonight. The first is approval of bills. There's also a motion to accept with gratitude a donation from Church Alive. The Church Alive has graciously purchased furniture from IKEA, appliances, and various items for the use of staff and students at the Bulldog Academy program, totaling $4,667. So the resolution is to graciously accept that donation. There's also an item to approve a transportation service agreement for 2 students. Also a tuition contract with Lyndhurst Board of Education for a student attending the Bulldog Academy. And lastly, there is the annual renewal of the contract with Paret Somjen Architects for the period effective July 1st, 2017 for the 2017-2018 school year. And in that item, the note of award of professional services contract text, just noting that there is a typo in that, and it will read as October 2nd instead of September 2nd in that notice.
I want to just add one thing to the donation. Because this is not a typo, but this was after the agenda went out for delivery. A few more items came in. We got more. So the donation that we are going to accept tonight, and the minutes will reflect the change, is really for $6,458.18. So $6,458.18.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. A question from me. So the transportation services agreement is obviously for some extraordinary transportation requirements, but the surcharge with that?
Yeah, the Northern Regional Ed Services Commission is based out of Passaic County, and they do have a surcharge for districts they work with outside of Passaic County.
Just a comment.
Yes.
Regarding the Lyndhurst enrollment at the Bulldog Academy, do we have a total of 5 enrolled?
We have 3 students from Lyndhurst.
3 from Lyndhurst.
This one came on board. The other 2 came on board a little earlier. He was there from the start of the school year, but
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
So I'll move numbers 1 through 5.
And is there a second?
Second.
Last questions or comments? None. Ask the secretary to pull the board, please.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
Mrs. Librera,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone,
Yes.
Mr. Racine,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. McLean.
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
I realize I'll need to appoint someone to be policy chair.
Right.
So I'll consider that, and I'll reach out to one of you to fill in for Mr. Chu as the policy chair until that
Yeah.
position is
just a comment. I don't remember when we had this discussion, but we had it with the full board. But I don't know if Clay, if you were here or not. When Mr. Chu was still here as the chair, now that we're with Strauss Esme, we get more frequent. I just remind everybody, we get more frequent updates, right? And some of the policies come in; they're mandated policy changes based on citations in law that have changed or the like. I thought, for the sake of expediency, on the mandated changes, I would just move them forward without the committee to review, because we don't have much say in it anyway, and we get 2 readings. Remember, so the full board would see it and have a first reading and a second reading should there be questions on policy changes that are either a discretionary on our part or any mandated change that might provide more thoughtful discussion. Like, for example, the non-mandated one was the opioid antidote policy or things of that nature. We certainly would bring to the committee first. But I don't want to see some mandated legal policy sit for an extra month when there really isn't much debate. And Mr. Chu agreed, and I thought most of you did agree with that as well. So with that said, and probably at a next meeting or so, we'll be sending some mandated policies. Okay.
Is there anything for building and grounds?
Obviously, we've not had a committee meeting. I know we have committee meetings for the 16th. I guess the only question I had is if there's something that's in the overarching concepts that we'd like to discuss, can we discuss that committee meeting to be considered for some sort of repair like we did with the roof and other things?
In other words, could we take out some things and put them into our capital? Right. I think going forward, those are things we would look at.
Okay. Yeah, there was one specific thing at Union, but it can wait till the committee meeting.
Yeah. Yes, and I mean, I think there's some things that we could look at in terms of the aggregate cost of a potential referendum. Those things would not make a major dent, but they'll make a little dent, but they also could get some things done ahead of schedule.
Correct.
Okay, and yes,
I just have one question. I brought up the buildings and grounds because I had to do Mr. Paterno, the administrative council report. Number F, the principals are reminded to ask any outside group, REF, PTA, etc., to donate an item that requires installation to secure the appropriate building construction permit.
Right. We, the PTA put up signs at the kindergarten center. If you go by the kindergarten center, you see a wooden sign on the front lawn. It's very nice, you know. Kindergarten center established. PTA donated that. The PTA got the contractor. The contractor came in and put it in. Nobody got a building permit. So then we get a citation that says, hey, you put something else up without a building permit. So what I'm reminding the principals of is when a PTA says, how would you like a sign on your front lawn? You know, make sure they get the building permit. Because otherwise you may have to take it down and put it back up, or you may have to pay a fine or things of that nature. And so...
Don't mean that thing?
No, well, no, no. Like for example, we didn't do the pavers here at the high school. The REF did that, and they get the service in because if we mount it, we're paying for it. The donation is they're doing the work, and often it's somebody who's a member of the PTA who runs a business of some kind. So, but we would certainly get the permit for them if we. But it's an oversight because we're not putting it in, and we didn't get the permit. No, we would, if they're donating money, then we're doing the work. But if they're donating the labor and the service, the donation was, hey, we'll install this sign for you. And by the way, I mean, we worked it out with the borough. We'll take care of it, and it's going to be okay. But it's you'd rather not have to pay a fine or pay a permit after the fact.
The sign looks very nice, by the way.
It looks great. Yeah. Oh, the first day I went down there, I took a picture of it. I sent it to Joe and Brenda. Look how great the sign. And then I go back to my office and I have a little note. So I deleted the picture right away, so there's nothing to be traced back to me. Can we speak about committee meetings?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not so sure we're going to have much to meet on at this point in time. And I do think that we've had a lot of meetings. I don't like to bring people out just for the sake. I mean, there's really nothing in curriculum instruction at this point, nothing in personnel. There's nothing in policy looming except those mandated ones. Finance, we're not ready to start yet. We'll be hitting the ground with that usually in November-ish, right, into November. I mean, building and grounds, we could talk in terms of relation to the planning, but I almost think we should decide as a board, are we going to go forward with schematic plans everywhere and then start picking apart some of those schematic plans? So I'm going to propose, in light of the fact we've had about 6 meetings in the last 8 weeks, that maybe we just don't meet committees and have a little more direction when November comes in terms of finance and building and grounds. So, unless somebody feels the need.
I'm okay with it. I can even just sidebar with you. It was something brought up at back to school night.
Yeah.
Just pointed out to me that you, that's all.
Yeah, okay.
Very good. So at 8:53, we'll open the floor to the. Oh no, I guess we don't. We did that earlier, so we're okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So old business legislative update.
I just have, as you said before, the reminder that at our next meeting is the 23rd, our regular meeting, and that we are then that's the last day that is due for the self-evaluation. I know like 5 o'clock is the deadline for that day, so if we could get it done, that would be really good. We'll do it with 8 board members and not 9 because he won't have completed it.
I completed mine, by the way.
You did.
Yes.
Congratulations. That's very, very good. I would see Matt leave on Wednesday, and I'm sure people told me that some people did.
I
So
completed
we have to the 23rd to get that done. It's online. Go to the NJSBA website. The other thing that I just thought, it's not exactly legal, but I was curious and looking
Don't
up.
start with it's not exactly legal.
It's not, no, I mean, for, that was sports wording on my part. Thank you for the correction. It's not exactly a legal update.
Okay.
But voters in 9 New Jersey school districts approved their renovation projects on Tuesday. There were 15, and 9 of them were approved. But what was interesting to me, and I'm just throwing this out for consideration, and maybe I think some more information would help me understand this, but Bergen County's was easy. It was Crestville approved, $12,446,000, and it's going to get a state funding of $2,906 for planning, design, and construction of additional classrooms and so forth. But some of them had, for instance, in Middlesex County, had 4 separate proposals for $50,585,000. And if the first proposal, was accepted, then the other ones would come into play. As it turned out, it didn't. But they broke up their whole renovation.
Right.
So for that.
You could do that. You could put up multiple questions in a referendum. You could also put it up in a way that you say, you know, 1 has to pass. If
Right.
2 and 3 pass and 1 doesn't, you know, then the other 2 don't go. You know, we've had conversations with the architect and his firm, who have obviously a lot of experience throughout the state with renovations, about the pros and cons of that approach. And I think going forward, we'll have those conversations. There are some positives, but there's also some negatives, because you may get people, you know, it's almost like you're splitting the vote then in terms of that. But that's correct. You can set it up that way with multiple questions.
What I was trying to figure out is how would it be to our advantage to do that, and I couldn't quite see it.
Well, Mr. Chapin and his firm and Mr. Carton felt it wouldn't be.
It would be?
Would not be.
It would not be.
But again, you know, we're not a long way. We're a few months, but we're not there yet. You know, that's something we can look at and talk about.
Thank you.
Okay. Committee meeting, so now, I'm sorry, any questions or comments on that? No? So at 8:57, we will open the, open the meeting to the public for any other comments or questions. Okay, at 8:58, we'll close it. And we do have a need for an executive.
4 student issues.
Executive session to discuss 4 student issues. Would someone please make that motion?
So moved.
Guerrero, seconded. Second from the zone. Voice votes.
Aye.
Aye. All in favor? Any of those opposed? Okay, so we'll move into executive session. 10 minutes. Action will not be taken.